Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today as we continue our series on Guided by God. We hope you all had a great week, stayed well and enjoyed the wonderful weather that we had, right? You know, some of my family in England have been building snowmen this week. It's been a really snowy week for them. They sent me a picture of this snowman, but nothing like that for us, right? Anyway, last week we looked at Noah and how he was led by God and listened to him. This week, we're going to look at not just one person, but a few people who were also guided by God and heroes of their time. Everybody loves a hero, don't they? Who's your hero, Mr. Peter?
I think that'd be Joshua, Miss Kathy.
Joshua. Okay, you have a biblical one. Mine, not so biblical. Mine is Maria from The Sound of Music. I just thought she was a wonderful character. So, anyway, many years have passed since the Great Flood. The earth is now repopulated and there are lots of different countries and people all over the place. And the Israelites have been led out of Egypt by Moses and led by Mr. Peter's hero, Joshua, into what land, Mr. Peter?
The Promised Land, Miss
The
Kathy.
Promised Land. And what else did they call it?
The land of milk and honey.
That's right, the land of milk and honey. And Joshua got the people settled into their new country, each tribe in their own area, and led them in many battles to defeat the wicked nations that were living there already. But although the Israelites followed God, they didn't obey him completely. You know, God had told them to clear the land of all the other nations so that they wouldn't be influenced by them, and so they could be a great witness to how great God is and how he is the only true God. While Joshua was alive, his leadership kept the Israelites focused on God. But when Joshua died and there was nobody to take his place, nobody who was as dedicated to God as Joshua was, and the Bible tells us that after all the people of Joshua's generation had died, another generation grew up who neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. And what a sad thing that was. So what do you think happened then after Joshua died and this other generation didn't know God?
They just went and did their own thing.
They did. They all went and did their own thing. They stopped following. It didn't take long for the Israelites to forget God and begin to follow the idols of the other nations that they had not cleared out of Canaan. And once they started down that slippery slope, it didn't take long for them to be in big trouble. The surrounding nations didn't particularly like the Israelites, well, it's probably an understatement, and wanted to capture this land again for themselves. After all, it was good land. It was the land of
milk and honey.
That's right. But God used these troubles and allowed them to happen so he could turn their hearts away from the false gods and back to him. When things got so bad, battles were being lost, people were being taken captive, they were mistreated and oppressed by foreign nations, they finally cried out to God to save them, like a last-ditch effort after they tried everything else. Is that a good thing to do, Mr. Peter?
No, Miss Kathy.
No, to try everything in your own strength first and go to God last? No, that's completely backwards. We ask God for help first. And because God is so compassionate and loving, he agreed to save the Israelites, just like he agrees to save us. Not once, not twice, but many times and through a number of different people. Do you know how many in total?
No, Miss Kathy.
12 different people. So we finally get to the heroes of this time in history. What's the general name for these people, these 12 people? They were the judges, right? Rather than appointing a king over the nation, because God was their king, he used judges to save them. What do you picture when you hear the word judge? What kind of person?
Man with a black robe.
That's right, a man or a woman with a black robe. Sometimes they used to wear a white wig, right? That's what we're sort of used to. Men and women with a lot of learning. Well, these judges weren't like that at all. They were mostly ordinary men and one woman who God called in different ways to deliver, to provide, to be powerful for, and to lead the nation of Israel. For 325 years, judges were God's chosen method to save his people and bring them back to him. And the one thing they had in common was a willingness to be guided by God. All right, here's a little test. Can you tell me the name of just one of the judges? Perhaps the most famous one of all. Do you know that, Mr. Peter?
Samson, Miss Kathy.
Samson, that's right. He's the last of the judges that we read about in the book of Judges. But we're not going to look at him today. We're going to look, maybe we'll do that another time. I want to look at 3 judges from this book and how they were guided by God to do great things. So the first one is Ehud. I don't know if that's exactly how you pronounce his name. Maybe his name was Edward Hudson and they just shortened it to Ehud.
Kind of like J-Lo, Miss
Kind
Kathy?
of like J-Lo, it's an Ehud. Well, whatever. When Ehud comes into the picture, Israel is under the power of Eglon, the king of Moab. And for 18 years, Eglon had ruled cruelly over them.
Eglon, Miss Kathy? Like Eglon's best?
Eglon's best. Well, he wasn't the best, that's for sure. Interestingly, the Bible doesn't tell us what Ehud looks like. It just tells us that he's left-handed, like that made him weird or something. Are left-handed people weird, Mr. Peter?
Miss Kathy, I'm left-handed. I must be weird.
You must be weird. All right, well, I'm left-handed too. So maybe we'll just be weird together. Anyway, that's how the Bible described him. But you see, back in those days, being left-handed was considered to be a handicap or a disadvantage, particularly for a soldier. But listen to how God used that to defeat Eglon. Ehud went to the king with a tribute. I'm guessing it was a present of some kind. Once he had given him the gift, he left peacefully with his men, but then he turned back, told his men to go on without him, and went back to King Eglon, who was all alone in his room. What Eglon didn't know was that Ehud had made a sword and strapped it to his right leg, where it was hidden. When Ehud reached for the sword, the king didn't guess what he was doing. He was used to soldiers drawing a sword with their right hand, not their left. So Ehud caught the king by surprise and overpowered him. Finally, Israel was free from Eglon's tyranny, and Ehud judged in peace for 80 years. I guess you never underestimate a left-handed person. Well, after Ehud died, and Israel unfortunately went back to their old ways of not worshiping God, following the gods of the nations around them, God raised up a judge called Shamgar. And not very much is known about him. The Bible records after Ehud came Shamgar, son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad.
That's a sham wow, Miss Kathy.
That's a sham wow, that's right. He too saved Israel. Well, any idea what an ox goad is, Mr. Peter?
No, but I believe you got a picture, Miss Kathy,
got a
that I'm going to show
picture
them.
right here. There it is. That's, I don't know that.
Well, hold it, Miss Kathy, hold it.
Maybe that way?
Yes,
all right.
Miss Kathy. It looks like an extra large nose picker.
Okay. All right. Well, it wasn't used for that. It was used for herding the oxen. This part here and that part there, for guiding them. That's why it's called an ox goad. It moved them along the way. It wasn't a fighting tool at all. But somehow, God gave Shamgar the strength and ability to use this simple tool as a weapon. And Shamgar must have trusted God and been guided by him in this incredible battle in which he defeated an arch enemy of Israel. Again, a sham wow, right? So the last judge we're going to look at is the only woman judge, and God appointed her after Israel had again forgotten him and been cruelly oppressed, this time by King Jabin, who actually lived in the land of Canaan, which was also known as the land of
milk and honey.
That's right. For 20 years, this evil king had ruled over the Israelites until God raised up the woman Deborah to rescue his people. They had again called out to him in desperation, and that's why he chose Deborah to save them. And this might have seemed odd for that time. You know, it was usually a man who was thought to be strong enough or clever enough to lead a nation. But you see, God can use whoever he wants and who he sees as the person to get the job done. Deborah was a prophetess, which at that time meant she encouraged the people to live for God. She told a soldier called Barak to go and fight the army of Jabin, and that God would give him victory. She agreed to go with Barak. He didn't have the confidence to do it. He said to her, I'll only do it if you come with me. So she went and stood with the army during that battle, and they won the battle. Deborah's confidence in God and his strength gave the soldiers the courage and ability to defeat the enemy. She listened to God and acted wisely on his guidance. You know, Deborah was great at planning and giving advice, and she was a natural leader. And she judged Israel for 40 years, and again, there was peace. So what's the lesson for us in this? Well, firstly, like we learned earlier, go to God first when things go wrong. Don't wait until all else fails. He'll always be willing to help you. Secondly, God can and does use unlikely, ordinary people to accomplish great things. You know, that's encouragement for us because we're pretty unlikely and ordinary ourselves, right? But we can still do great things for God. Thirdly, when we allow ourselves to be guided by God and follow what we know is right in his eyes, we can have his peace in our hearts. And that's what we pray for. We should pray to have God's guidance so that we can have his peace and know that we're doing the right thing. So our prayer for ourselves and for you this week is that you will ask God for his help, for his guidance, and also for his peace in your heart so that you can live a life that is a wonderful witness for him. All right, well, that's our lesson for this week. Again, next week we'll find somebody else that was guided by God. Have a great week. Just be kind and do the right thing. Maybe call Mrs. Murray or text her and tell her who your hero is. And we will see you next week. Mr. Peter, what are you going to go off and do now?
I think I'm going to go to the land of milk and honey.
All right, everybody, we love you. We'll see you next week. Take
Bye,
care
kids.
and God bless. Bye-bye.